You can count when you're happy. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can count when you're sad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or count when you're frightened. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Count when you're mad. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Counting is wonderful. Counting is marvelous. Counting's terrific. And how?
Well, we're finally back to what at first seems like typical Kryptofreak fare as we open with the standard teaser about a character we've never seen before with a creepy disposition. And unless this is your first foray into the show, or maybe even if it's not, you're going to know that whoever is in the scene with him has a good chance of dying, and he's either going to display his kryptonite-bestowed superpowers, or else this is the origin of how he gets them. Well, this time it's the latter, and the person in the scene with him actually doesn't die, although we think she's dead all the way until the last minutes of the episode. Hey, that's new. Is there maybe a hint of potential with this one? The theme of this episode is death and the pain of being right on the verge of death. So Tyler's mother is on her deathbed and asks Tyler to help her die. He actually goes along with it because he hates seeing his mother in pain, right in the middle of the hospital, knowing it'll send him right to jail, and just when I think the story is already taking a leap that anyone would be willing to throw their entire life away to put their own mother out of her misery, or especially that any mother would ask her son to throw his life away just to put her out of her misery, Tyler himself takes a leap, right out a window, in a fight with some nurses and orderlies. He's killed, but the mix of painkillers and the kryptonite in his conveniently placed and completely unexplained bracelet bring him back from the dead and give him the power to... Well, let's see. What's the theme this episode? And the thing he was doing just before he died? Oh yes, the power to disintegrate people by touching them. He takes this as a calling and sets out to help people die who are in too much pain to go on living. Thus the title, Reaper. Meanwhile, Clark and Lex are each having daddy issues. Clark doesn't want to go on his annual fishing trip with his dad because he doesn't really like fishing and apparently picked this year to be sick enough of it to go around moping about it, and Lex's father is turning up the heat after Lex refused to return to Metropolis to work with his father last episode by sending recurring lapdog Dominic Senatori to go through his books and see where all his extra unaccounted for money is going since he's not spending it on partying and sports cars. We know, of course, that he's been funding research into the accident with Clark and the pilot and into the meteor rocks, and if Lionel is getting wind of that, then that's further explanation as to why Lionel wants Lex out of Smallville. Lex says it's because his father is starting to see him as competition. That's true, but I don't think Lex is quite sure yet as to how heavy a competition it really is. Dominic plays hardball and tells Jonathan about Lex's research on his family, which further puts them at odds, and when Lex offers to send Clark and Jonathan to a football game in Metropolis in lieu of their fishing trip, considering what Jonathan's just figured out about Lex, that puts he and Clark further at odds. Finally, these two father-son relationships that have been closely paralleled all season are interestingly directly affecting each other. In the end, Lex rescinds his offer for the football game and pays to have the Metropolis Sharks play with Whitney for Whitney's dying father, all to impress Jonathan, which seems to work. And he solves the Dominic problem by putting him in a trunk and delivering him to Lionel, telling him that if he wants something from Lex, to just make a phone call. And Clark decides making his dad happy is more important than his petty boredom with fishing, so he agrees to go. Meanwhile, Randall disintegrates an old lady Martha and Clark are helping in a nursing home and turns her dog Pepper into actual ground pepper. Clark and Chloe investigate, and Clark gets to him before he can do the same to Whitney's father, who he, of course, overhears Whitney and Lana talking about in the graveyard because they all happen to be the only three people there at that exact moment. But unlike the general formula would call for, he isn't killed in the fight with Clark, but rather Clark convinces him not to kill anyone else for the sake of his mother, who survived his attack. So Randall decides maybe his calling wasn't to go around killing people after all, and instead he puts his own hands together and disintegrates himself. Good thing he didn't attend any concerts while he was undead, or the applause may have done him in. Lex then calls in the Metropolis Sharks for Whitney. Clark chooses that moment to tell his dad he'll go fishing with him because there's just enough time left to wrap up that thread before the episode ends, and what a thrilling cliffhanger that would have been, right? Will Clark and his dad go fishing? Tune in next time. Same Clark time, same Clark channel. Then credits. As lazy as the villain plot is this episode, and I do mean lazy, it's nice to see another Kryptofreak who doesn't have a dull and obvious revenge motive. A lot of these people get superpowers and immediately think, hey, who do I hate that I can kill, or who can I exploit that I can kill later if exploiting them doesn't work? I'm not saying this guy is very well thought out, and as I said, I need some character development to even buy that he'd kill his own mother without giving it more than 5 seconds hesitation, just because she asked him to. But it's cool that when he gets powers, he doesn't really see them as powers. Without coming out and saying it, and I think it's pretty clear, he seems to see himself as an angel of death, and the episode really hints at the idea that he didn't survive the accident. He seems to see himself as undead, seems to actually be dead, and only back to help people die who don't want to suffer. He actually thinks he's helping people, and that's not something we get enough with these Kryptofreaks, the bad guy who doesn't think he's the bad guy. It's not even that warped of an idea, really. I mean, if I died trying to kill my own mother, okay, just go with it, because she was in severe pain, and I came back with the exact superpower that would make that really easy, just touching people and they're gone with no pain instantly, and I knew I was back from the dead, I might think I was an angel of death, too. I also really like that he realizes he's wrong about this at the end, when he finds out his mother's still alive and wants to repent for it. He can't stand the unbearable pain of knowing he's a murderer, and so he chooses to die. It's too convenient, sure, but it's also poetic. And at least he's not just generically evil just because of crypto powers. Again, remember people like him when we get to later seasons and the show starts trying to tell us Kryptofreaks are psychotic because of kryptonite. That's clearly not the case with some of these first season villains, and at this point, the show is still attempting to do a variety of stories about different kinds of Kryptofreaks. They don't always work, but it's nice to see it trying. This is kind of a cleaning house sort of episode, setting the status quo for a lot of unresolved threads throughout the season as the series continues to play itself as mostly one-shot stories with strands of continuity happening on the sidelines. And as disconnected and clunky as that could have been, it really works well, and I appreciate all the very confidently written continuity here. It deals with Lex refusing to go to Metropolis, Lex investigating the Kents, Jonathan's hatred for the Luthers, Lex and Lionel's real-life chess match that centers around the supernatural mysteries of Smallville, Whitney's dad having another heart attack, and all of this is woven together nicely under the banner of a central theme, death. Sure, there's a lot of convenient plot points around the Kryptofreak, but otherwise, the theme is handled pretty delicately and subtly. As Whitney is losing his father, Clark is learning to appreciate his, and Lex is envious of Jonathan, wishing his father could be that way, and rather than finding an appreciation for his own father, who, as established, could never love his son, Lex is finding ways to get out from under his control and to make himself appreciated to those he respects, like Jonathan. I think a lesser episode might have had characters dropping platitudes about suffering and death at random, but this one is pretty sophisticated about it, and when Lex does talk about death, it feels as though it could have been in any episode, not like it's too obvious because of who the Kryptofreak is, and it really brings all the threads together for me. He tells Clark, "When my father dies, kings will come to his funeral, but when yours does, his friends will come." Man, that's great stuff. It's a profound thing for him to say, but it also illustrates how badly he wishes he could trade his life for Clark's. I've talked a lot about how complicated Lex is as a character and how much I love that. He clearly wants to be like Clark, but in his quest to get out from under the thumb of his father, he becomes more like Lionel because he uses ruthless techniques he learned from his father in order to do that. And how else would he? So while we can see in Lex's eyes how much he longs for Jonathan's respect, we can also recognize the manipulation and how he goes about trying to achieve it. Then, when he drugs Dominic and takes him to his father in the trunk of a car, and Lionel says, "Well done, Lex," impressed with Lex for doing something so radical to take charge of his own life, like Lionel would, and we see how maddening this dilemma is for Lex. He's as much of a product of his father as Clark is of his, and he doesn't know how to beat his father without becoming him. I have reason to like everyone in this episode. Sure, Clark comes off as a little whiny with the fishing thing, but I maybe played that up to be more obnoxious than it really is. It's a situation a lot of fathers and sons go through, where the son begins to become his own man and isn't necessarily into what he used to love, and the father doesn't know how to let go. Both men are right, and at the end, it could have gone either way. If the story wanted Jonathan to learn a lesson about letting his son go his own way, that would have worked. But as it is, Clark gets sympathetic points for being the bigger man, sucking it up, and giving his dad what he wants, because it's difficult for these two men to talk about sentimental things like that, and Clark's being careful to make sure he and Jonathan don't wind up drifting apart like Jonathan did with his father. I'm also surprised to say Whitney and Lana aren't irritating here either, despite Whitney having a role in this episode. When Clark graciously comes by to ask him about his dad, Whitney doesn't throw it in his face, and he genuinely appreciates it. And Lana's not annoying because she's hardly in this episode. Yay, 2 in a row! Not a lot more to say here. The Kryptofreak is contrived. He just happens to have a bracelet of kryptonite. He just happens to get a power directly associated with the activity he was doing at the time he died, and he just happens to be in the right place and time to involve himself directly with the main characters. Stranger still, though, is that he uses his real name when the police have got to be looking for him. Chloe and Clark find information on his death, so obviously paperwork was filed when he fell out a hospital window and was admitted to a morgue. After killing a mortician, I don't think I'd be using my real name. Ultimately, even though I'm glad it breaks formula a little, I don't think this one needed the Kryptofreak at all, and the silly and lazy way he's dreamed up drags the score down. And questions to ask Darrell when I get to heaven. Why do dogs always seem to know when someone's dangerous or has scary superpowers? And why in a script would you call a dog Pepper who's about to get disintegrated? And why wouldn't Chloe at least make a crack about it? I get that it's morbid and all, but really, could you resist that gag? A pile of black powder that used to be a dog named Pepper. Really? And now let's go to the scoreboard. Well, my theory that good episodes might typically not have much to count is holding up this time. Hardly anything this week. We've got one Kryptofreak, Tyler Randall, with the power to turn you into powder just by touching you, and his villain motivation is, I only do this to people who think it's a good idea. We've got one character walking away angry, that's Jonathan after Clark tells him he's not into fishing, and we have one bad guy death. Now, Randall doesn't die in a fight with Clark, but he kills himself, and that's still a regular Smallville thing. Take the guy out because it's the last 5 minutes of the episode. So I'll count it as a bad guy death. I'm going to give Reaper a 3 out of 4. A lot of subplots juggled nicely, but the Kryptofreak story just gets in the way. Was there anything I missed in any category? Leave me a personal message on Geekvolution, and I'll be sure to add it to the count. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.